The first time Daniel and Ethan were paired together, it was by accident, or at least, that was what the teacher claimed. A literature project needed partners, and with uneven numbers in the class, the shy boy found himself face to face with the newcomer. Daniel's heart pounded when Ethan slid into the seat beside him, smiling with the kind of ease that made everyone feel chosen. "You don't talk much, do you?" Ethan teased lightly, opening his notebook. His voice carried no malice, only curiosity. Daniel shook his head, eyes fixed on the desk. I talk enough," he murmured, but Ethan chuckled, not unkindly. "Good. Then I'll do the talking, and you can keep me from failing." For the rest of the period, Daniel found himself listening to Ethan ramble about music, late-night gaming sessions, and dreams of traveling beyond the small town they all felt trapped in. Daniel barely contributed, yet he felt strangely alive just sitting there, the air between them buzzing with an energy he couldn't explain. Over the next week, the project gave them reasons to meet after class. They lingered in the library, whispering over highlighted passages, their heads nearly touching as they bent over the same page. Daniel tried to keep his distance, but Ethan had a way of breaking down his walls without even trying. When Ethan laughed at one of Daniel's hesitant comments, not mocking but genuinely delighted, Daniel's chest warmed in a way that startled him. Michael noticed almost immediately. One afternoon, as they packed their bags, Michael leaned close. "Careful, Dan," he said in a half-joking tone. "He's got that look that makes people do stupid things." Daniel blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Michael said, slinging his bag over his shoulder, "you're not exactly subtle. You blush every time he breathes in your direction." The words burned, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Daniel tried to laugh it off, insisting that it was only a school project, nothing more. Michael didn't push, but the concern in his eyes lingered long after the conversation ended. That evening, Daniel went to see Mr. Collins as planned. The tutor greeted him warmly, ushering him inside the familiar apartment filled with the scent of coffee and old books. They reviewed equations for a while, but Mr. Collins soon reached for Daniel's hand, lacing their fingers together. His touch was steady, practiced, reassuring. "You're distracted," Mr. Collins said softly, searching Daniel's face. Daniel's heart skipped. He forced a smile. "Just tired. Schoolwork, you know." But the lie tasted bitter. While Mr. Collins kissed his forehead, Daniel's mind drifted back to the library, to Ethan's grin and the way his laughter had echoed in Daniel's ears long after it ended. The contrast was stark. Mr. Collins offered safety, maturity, a love hidden in shadow. Ethan offered something lighter, brighter, yet terrifying in its possibility. Days blurred into weeks, and Daniel could no longer deny the current pulling him toward Ethan. They stayed late after class, finishing their project long before the deadline but inventing excuses to meet again. Ethan started walking him halfway home, chatting about nothing and everything, and Daniel found himself laughing in ways he never had with anyone else. The ease between them frightened him, because it felt dangerously close to what he secretly longed for. One afternoon, as they packed up their notes in the library, Ethan hesitated. His voice dropped, hesitant for the first time since Daniel had met him. "I like talking to you. More than anyone else here." Daniel froze. His pulse roared in his ears. "Why?" he whispered. "Because you're real," Ethan said simply, his gaze steady. "Everyone else wants to impress. You just listen." The silence that followed stretched taut, filled with words neither dared to say. For a heartbeat, Ethan leaned closer, his hand brushing Daniel's. The touch sent a shiver racing through him, but panic surged just as quickly. Daniel pulled his hand back, forcing a nervous laugh. "We should finish this tomorrow," he muttered, gathering his things. Ethan let him go, but not before Daniel caught the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. That night, Daniel lay awake, torn between guilt and desire. Mr. Collins's affection weighed heavy on his conscience, yet Ethan's nearness haunted him with an ache that refused to fade. He told himself he had done the right thing by resisting, but deep down, he knew the boundary he clung to was weakening. Temptation was no longer an idea, it was alive, pressing closer each day, and Daniel feared that soon, he would no longer be able to resist it. The night it happened, camp was quieter than usual. Training had pushed everyone to their limits, and exhaustion had finally drowned out the usual whispers and restless movements. I lay in my cot, eyes tracing the faint patterns the lantern light made against the tent's fabric. Sleep refused to come, though my body begged for it. Thoughts circled the same orbit: Captain Hayes, his steady presence, the questions I dared not ask myself. The zipper at the entrance stirred suddenly. I sat up, instinct tightening my muscles, prepared for an order or alarm. Instead, a silhouette crouched through the narrow flap. My breath stalled when I recognized him. Captain Hayes moved carefully, closing the tent behind him, as though he had done this kind of sneaking before. "Brooks," he whispered, his tone softer than I had ever heard it. "You awake?" I managed a nod, words caught somewhere in my throat. He straightened slowly, his figure outlined in muted light. Seeing him here, stripped of command, unsettled me more than any battlefield could. "I couldn't sleep," he continued, lowering himself onto the empty crate beside my cot. "Mind if I sit a while?" The tent seemed to shrink around us. I nodded again, unsure if I was granting permission or surrendering to inevitability. His eyes held something unguarded, something that did not belong to the man who barked commands at sunrise. That he spoke first about the day, about drills, about the younger recruits who struggled. His words were measured, but his voice betrayed fatigue. Then, without warning, he shifted. "Do you ever feel," he asked, his gaze fixed on the ground, "that you've built a life so carefully, only to find cracks in the foundation?" I swallowed hard. The question didn't need an answer, it was a confession disguised as conversation. Silence stretched between us, heavy, waiting. "I shouldn't be here," he said, finally meeting my eyes. His jaw tightened, as though discipline wrestled with desire inside him. "But there's something about you, Brooks. Something I can't ignore." The word sent a shock through me, both terrifying and electrifying. Every glance, every subtle moment I had second-guessed, suddenly sharpened into clarity. "Sir," I began, instinctively reaching for distance, but he lifted a hand, halting me. "No ranks right now," he murmured. "Just Michael." Hearing his first name spoken aloud between us felt forbidden, like stepping over a line I had only ever imagined. My pulse thundered in my ears. He shifted closer, the faint scent of sweat and desert air clinging to him. His hand hovered in hesitation before brushing lightly against mine. Every rule I had lived by screamed to pull away, but my body betrayed me. I stayed still, trembling under the weight of his touch. His eyes searched mine, asking a question he dared not voice. I answered by not moving, by allowing the space between us to dissolve. The kiss was not rushed. It was tentative, cautious, as though both of us feared the world might collapse if we pressed too hard. Yet within that restraint burned something undeniable. The warmth of his mouth, the certainty of his choice in that moment, unraveled the distance we had fought to maintain. When it broke, silence returned heavier than before. He leaned back slightly, his breathing uneven. "This is wrong," he said, voice roughened by guilt. "I know," I whispered. But even as I spoke, I knew neither of us regretted it. The tense walls seemed to hold our secret, trapping it between the heat of our bodies and the cool night air that we sat side by side in the aftermath, not touching, not speaking. The stillness pressed down on us, carrying both comfort and shame. Outside, the camp slumbered, unaware that a line had been crossed, that loyalty had fractured in the shadows. When he finally stood to leave, his expression was unreadable. "Get some rest, Brooks," he said, his voice slipping back toward formality. Yet the use of my surname couldn't erase the intimacy we had just shared. The flap closed behind him, leaving me alone with pounding thoughts. My cot felt unchanged beneath me, but everything else had shifted irreversibly. The silence of the night no longer carried emptiness, it carried a secret, one that neither of us could take back, and as I lay staring into the dark, one truth settled deep inside me: this was only the beginning. When I woke, the rain had stopped. The world outside the tent was damp and hushed, washed clean by the night. Lucas was already up, crouched near the dying fire, coaxing a faint flame from wet wood. He looked up when I stepped out, his smile small but genuine, like nothing had happened, like the silence between us had simply dissolved into the dawn. "Coffee?" he asked, lifting a tin mug that I nodded, grateful for the simplicity of the gesture. The aroma of burnt beans and smoke filled the air. We sat side by side again, but this time, there was no easy laughter, no nervous energy. Just a shared quiet, shaped by everything we hadn't said. The lake shimmered under pale morning light. I found myself watching Lucas's reflection in the water more than the horizon itself. He had that same stillness about him, that unguarded ease that drew me in despite myself. But now, it only made the knot in my chest tighter that he broke the silence first. "You don't have to explain anything," he said softly. "Last night. I get it." "I shouldn't have let it get that far," I murmured. "It didn't go anywhere," he said, turning toward me. "Sometimes, stopping means more than following through." His words settled deep. There was no bitterness in them, only understanding. That made it worse somehow, his grace, his calm acceptance. I wanted him to be angry. It would have been easier to leave anger behind than kindness. That we spent the morning in fragments, packing tents, cleaning the site, exchanging light remarks that felt like placeholders for heavier truths. When the sun climbed higher, I knew it was time to leave. My car was parked near the forest trail, the same road that would lead me back to the city, to Daniel, to the life that suddenly felt too small and too complicated all at once. Lucas walked me part of the way. The path was muddy, leaves slick beneath our boots. The air smelled of rain and pine, sharp and alive. Neither of us spoke until the clearing came into view. "This is where we part ways," he said, his tone steady but his eyes uncertain. That I hesitated, my hands gripping the strap of my bag. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," he replied. "Some things don't need words." I wanted to thank him, for the conversation, the silence, the strange kind of honesty we'd shared, but everything I thought to say sounded too small for what I felt. So instead, I just nodded. That he stepped closer, close enough for me to see the faint stubble on his jaw, the tired kindness in his gaze. Then, before I could react, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a deep kiss, not desperate or stolen, it was soft, fleeting, full of everything we'd left unsaid. When he pulled back, he smiled faintly. "Take care, Ethan." I watched him walk away down the narrow path until his figure disappeared into the trees. For a long time, I stood there, listening to the quiet pulse of the forest. Then I turned toward my car and drove. The road stretched endlessly, winding between wet fields and low hills. My mind drifted between what had happened and what hadn't. Guilt and longing tangled together until they were indistinguishable. I told myself it was harmless, that I hadn't truly betrayed Daniel, but the truth was heavier than that. I'd crossed a line the moment I wanted something that wasn't mine. When I reached home, Daniel was in the kitchen, stirring sugar into his coffee. He looked up and smiled, that familiar tired smile I'd known for years. "Hey," he said, "how was the trip?" "Peaceful," I answered, though my voice faltered on the word. He hugged me, and I stood there, feeling the warmth of him, the comfort of routine. His arms felt safe, but a part of me stayed somewhere by that lake, caught between guilt and gratitude. Over the next few days, life resumed its rhythm: work, dinner, small talk, silence. Yet something had shifted. I started to notice things I'd stopped seeing: the way Daniel hummed while reading the news, the way he always left the light on for me when I came home late. There was tenderness there, quiet and worn, but still real. One night, I watched him fall asleep beside me, the city lights brushing across his face, and I realized that love wasn't always passion or discovery. Sometimes it was the choice to stay, even when staying was hard. Lucas remained a memory, one that didn't fade, but softened with time. He wasn't a mistake. He was a mirror, showing me the parts of myself I'd forgotten, the hunger I'd tried to bury under years of habit. As I lay awake, I thought of the forest, the rain, the flicker of the firelight on his face. And I whispered, quietly, to no one in particular. Sometimes it takes a stranger to remind you what love is, and what it isn't. It had been nearly 6 months since I last saw Adam, yet his absence felt louder than his presence ever had. London had entered that grey stretch between seasons, the air sharp with cold, the sky low and colourless. I was living alone now, in a small flat overlooking a narrow street, my life pared down to quiet routines. I worked, slept, and tried not to think about him. Most days, I almost succeeded. Almost at it was late one Friday when I received a message. Just his name flashing across the screen was enough to undo weeks of effort. "Hey. Are you around?" My fingers hovered above the keyboard. A dozen responses came to mind, sarcastic, angry, indifferent, but all I typed was, "Yeah." He showed up an hour later, standing in my doorway with that same disarming half-smile, though time had softened it. His hair was longer, his eyes tired. He held a bottle of wine like a peace offering. "Didn't think you'd answer," he said. "I almost didn't." He nodded, stepping inside when I moved aside. The air between us was cautious, filled with the weight of unspoken memories. We sat opposite each other, the bottle unopened on the table. "How's Sophie?" I asked, the question tasting bitter even as I said it. He exhaled slowly. "She's gone. For good this time." "I'm sorry." He gave a faint laugh. "You're not." I didn't argue. Instead, I poured the wine, and for a while, we just sat there in silence, two people pretending not to be strangers. After a few glasses, the conversation loosened. He told me about his new job, how he was trying to be better, whatever that meant. I listened, just as I always had, though this time I kept my heart guarded. Then he said softly, "I think about that night sometimes." I froze. He continued, voice low and deliberate. "I told myself it didn't mean anything. But it did. And I think you knew that." I met his gaze, searching for regret, but found only exhaustion. "It's too late, Adam. Maybe. But I needed you to know." The honesty in his tone disarmed me. For a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen for, the one who had let his guard down, who'd reached for me not out of confusion, but need. "Why now?" I asked. "After everything?" He hesitated. "Because I keep looking for peace, and I only ever found it with you." The words landed like a confession and a curse at once. I wanted to believe them, but something in me had already changed. Time had replaced longing with clarity. I couldn't be his secret again, not even for comfort. "Adam," I said quietly, "you hurt me. You didn't mean to, but you did. You can't just come back because it's convenient." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I know. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." For a while, neither of us moved. The city hummed faintly outside, the sound of passing cars, distant laughter, life continuing without us. He stood, finishing his wine. "You're doing better than I expected," he said softly. "I had to." At the door, he paused. "If I'd been braver, maybe things would have been different." "Maybe," I said. "But we were who we were." He smiled faintly, a ghost of the man I once knew. "Take care, Ethan." When the door closed behind him, the silence was strangely gentle. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. Just lighter. As if something I'd carried too long had finally been set down. Later, I stood by the window, watching the streetlights blur in the drizzle. I thought about all the nights I'd spent replaying that moment in his bed, trying to decide whether it was love or loneliness. Now I understood, it was both. But it didn't need to define me anymore. Healing hadn't come with forgetting. It came with remembering differently. I poured the last of the wine into my glass and whispered into the quiet, "We were just two people trying to feel less alone." The words felt true. Outside, the rain began again, soft and rhythmic, like it always did. And for the first time, I didn't think of him. I just listened.